Idols of the Mind versus True Reality by Dr. B. Madhava Puri, Princeton Bhakti Vedanta Institute. An Introduction to the Complementarity of Science, Philosophy, and Religion. The current paradigm shift in 21st century biology demonstrates the relevance for this book's topics and the ongoing work of the Princeton Bhakti Vedanta Institute. Progress in biology is developing beyond a merely reductionist and mechanistic view of living entities and processes to a holistic, organismic, and systems perspective. This is represented by the ongoing public debate between biologists Richard Dawkins and Denis Noble, as will be seen. Richard Dawkins, Ph.D., is an evolutionary biologist and was professor for public understanding of science at Oxford University. He is most famous for his books such as The Selfish Gene and The God Delusion. He also coined the term meme, which refers to the cultural parallel of biological genes, such that both genes and memes transmit information and evolve over time. Dawkins is committed to a reductionist gene-centric view of all biological phenomena, rejects the existence of free will, and uses his scientific biases to criticize religion and deny the existence of God.
The coded information is potentially immortal. And that means that the difference between a successful gene and an unsuccessful gene really matters. It's going to matter for millions of years. So the genes that make it through those millions of years are the ones that are good at it. And good at it means good at building bodies, good at controlling the processes of embryology, to make bodies which have what it takes to preserve those genes and pass them on. And so I use this phrase survival machine. A body, an individual, is a survival machine. And that's by far the most powerful way of interpreting what an individual organism is. An individual organism is a throwaway survival machine for the self-replicating coded information which it contains. But it wasn't only kin that inspired me, it was the very idea of the survival machine of immortal genes, which goes back to the 1930s, I think. When I think I have free will, when I think that I'm exercising free choice, I'm deluding myself, that I'm my brain states are determined by physical events.
And I think that the sort of so-called sophisticated theologians who accept the scientific worldview don't impress me very much, because I don't think they've really thought through the negative impact that has on their religious worldview.
Denis Noble, CBE Ph.D., FRS, is a physiologist, as well as Professor Emeritus and co-director of computational physiology at Oxford University. His book, The Music of Life, was groundbreaking for the field of systems biology, and he also developed the first viable mathematical model of the working heart in 1960. Noble's organism-centered approach clarifies the role of specific gene functions in the broader context of an organism's living cognitive activities. He explains that progress in 21st century biology affirms the existence of free will or choice. Following moderating a 2009 debate between evolutionary biologists Lynn Margulis and Richard Dawkins, Denis Noble debated Dawkins in 2022.
Dawkins' selfish gene has been hugely influential, both within evolutionary biology and the wider public sphere. It is a beautiful, simple story that genes and not organisms drive evolutionary change. But critics argue the story is simplistic. The effect of a gene is not always the same and is dependent on its host and the cell environment. Denis Noble, a pioneer of systems biology, goes further, arguing that the organism and not genes are in fact in charge. So Denis, as you probably already know anyway, is a world-renowned biologist and Professor Emeritus of Cardiovascular Physiology at the University of Oxford. He's famous for developing the first ever mathematical model of cardiac cells in 1960. His most groundbreaking book, The Music of Life, was the first work in the field of systems biology. To my left, of course, is Richard Dawkins, who is a biologist and best-selling author. He is one of the most famous scientists in the world, but you don't need me to tell you that. Anyway, with good reason, his 1976 work, The Selfish Gene, was the first ever real blockbuster popular science book, shaping how we have all understood evolution and where we come from. And since then, of course, he's written numerous other bestsellers, including The Blind Watchmaker, The God Delusion, and Climbing Mount Improbable.
I approached this with some trepidation because Denis Noble was actually my doctoral examiner.
Richard, we're in the chair again.
So I'm somewhat nervous. I hope I pass today. To me, the argument today is about one paragraph in Denis's excellent book, Dance to the Tune of Life, which is a wonderful book. Except that it's wrong.
How the tables turn.
The sentence, well, the paragraph concerned is this book will show that there are no genes for anything. Living organisms have functions which use genes to make the molecules they need. Genes are used. They are not active causes. Now, I think that's a wonderful sentence because although it's wrong, it's clear. It's absolutely clear and open and articulate. And that makes my job relatively easy because I want to show that the exact opposite is true. The truth is opposite. Genes use individuals, use organisms as tools for their own propagation. If Denis is right, then I've been wrong for 50 years, and so have actually most of the people now working in the field. Suppose we put Denis's genome in a petri dish.
That's right, yes.
And keep it going for 10,000 years. Well, it wouldn't keep going, it would decay, as you rightly say. However, the information, it could be preserved on paper. You could actually write it down in a book. You could carve the A, T, C, and G codons in granite and keep it for 10,000 years, and then in 10,000 years type it into a sequencing machine, which we already have, and it would recreate an identical twin of Denis Noble.
No, I don't think it would.
You don't think it would?
No.
Why not?
Well, it would. It would need one. It would need an egg cell.
Of course it would. No,
Yes. I think we need the egg cell.
In 10,000 years, they will have the technology to take an egg cell.
Oh, I see. Okay, and I now therefore need to follow up on a different issue then, if I may, Richard. Yes, because you see, what it would need to be is a good self-replicator. And you won't be surprised that I disagree with you on self-replication, because I think that's a central feature. Because I think without the self-replicator, I'm not quite sure that I understand what the selfish gene idea really means. Now, what is the accuracy when the cell actually divides and provides two new cells? It's 1 in 10 to the 10. Hardly a single, that's rather like a proofreader of 10,000 books, going through 10,000 books and making sure there's not a single error in the whole 10,000 books. How is that achieved? It's utterly amazing. It's achieved by the living cell. Because what then happens as the problem of the breakages, as we might call them, in the DNA formation from the double helix when it's unwound, what then happens is a whole army of enzymes go in and literally proofread the mistakes. And I only know, that's why I say you'd have to put my genome in 10,000 years hence into a living cell to do it. Now the question is, which living cell? because you see, that will provide all the material initially to enable it to be reproduced. So what I'm saying is that it cannot be a faithful replicator except in the presence of its vehicle, which is the living cell. So I don't think there can be a neat separation between the replicator and the vehicle. It may seem utterly presumptuous for a physiologist, because that's what I am, to enter the hotly disputed philosophical area of free will. So I'll begin by making two bold assertions that I will justify during the talk. The first is that the processes by which living organisms make choices are indeed open to empirical investigation. The relevant questions I will show are empirical physiological questions as much as they are conceptual philosophical ones. The second is that these two aspects, the empirical and the conceptual, are necessarily related, because we cannot answer empirical scientific questions in a conceptual vacuum. No science can exist in a conceptual vacuum. If activated by the rest of the cell, notice that it's the living cell that does it. If activated by the rest of the cell, enables that gene to start informing the ribosomes in the cell to produce the protein necessary for that function. But that's not something that the gene does without being activated from the high-level property of the cell as a whole. So the functionality comes at a different level. It's not at the level of the nucleus. The nucleus is just a membrane that surrounds the DNA and holds the DNA tightly bound together in its chromosomes, usually, and just liberates little bits of it when you need to make more protein. That's all it is. It's the end of story. It is not what creates life. Now, I think for roughly 20 years since the sequencing of the genome, the first sequencing of the human genome in 2001, we've all labored under the illusion, because it is an illusion, that that promise will one day be satisfied, that people will find that program in the DNA and show how it works to create the organism. What they've been presented with from that study at University College London that I referred to, just recently published in the British Medical Journal, is that it's useless, even at predicting which diseases we're going to have. You can go to 23andMe and many other companies and pay maybe $1,000 and get your genome fully sequenced. It might tell you you've got a distant aunt in somewhere like India or Australia, but it won't tell you what diseases you're going to have. And that's what the study shows. So I say I'm sorry, because we've wasted 20 years when we could have been focusing at the level at which it's possible to understand health and disease. That's higher levels of the organism. And we didn't do that. We chose to spend all the money on sequencing as many genomes as possible. And we've ended up with the result that it doesn't tell us what makes us work. What makes us work as organisms is us. It is our cells, our tissues, our organs, and even the organism as a whole. Because remember, I put the sociotype at the top of that inverted triangle of causation. The really important decisions in life, like who are you going to marry? What kind of religion do you want to adopt? Do you want to adopt one at all? Or do you want to go on a holiday this way or that way? All these decisions are social decisions. They've got nothing to do with what genes you've got. Yes, there will be a propensity for people with particular kinds of genes to go one way or the other. But that's just probability. It doesn't tell you what will happen. So I think we can state categorically now that the idea that there is a program
in the DNA and that those genes created us body and mind is simply illusion. It's fairy tale. And that's what the selfish gene is. It's a fairy tale. Actually, I told that to Richard Dawkins last year, and he replied saying, but Denis, if you're right, I and many others have been wrong for 50 years. I just nodded my head. Enough said.
In summary, Denis Noble's pioneering work in systems biology shows that future progress in 21st century biology, which is essential for innovation in medicine, ecology, and other fields, must address the purposeful behavior of living entities, the capacity for and consequences of choice or decision-making, properly discriminating between bottom-up phenomena, where lower levels of organization like molecules or cells affect higher levels like the organism, and top-down phenomena where the organism determines cellular or molecular activity. The complementarity of science and philosophy. These principles nicely correspond with the work that B. Madhava Puri, Ph.D., has been involved in since the mid-1970s, as introduced in Idols of the Mind versus True Reality. The title of this book comes from Sir Francis Bacon, where human concepts are thought to be objectively true, and it synthesizes a Vedantic approach with that of Hegel grounded in the primacy of the idea, spirit, and consciousness. On the basis that there is no equivalence between organisms and machines, the author criticizes the attribution of metaphysical qualities to inanimate robots as a serious category error. Life and consciousness do not derive ultimately from matter. Interestingly, Nobel laureate and Emeritus honorary member George Wald was persuaded by this approach on encountering Vedantic philosophy and switched his views accordingly to assert that mind had always been present in evolution. This book makes a sophisticated and significant contribution to an emerging science of consciousness. Readers looking for a bridge between ancient Hindu philosophy and its Western counterpart will appreciate the general nature of this text. This book serves as a useful synopsis of the main arguments for looking beyond materialist science toward a more holistic worldview. Although some readers will find the pace and breadth of Dr. Puri's arguments disorienting, others will appreciate its comprehensiveness and straightforward presentation. In any case, the message is an important one, as materialist philosophy continues to wreak havoc on social relationships and the environment around the world. The book is available worldwide on Amazon. Scan the QR code for further details.